since we've seen a little bit of a pullback. It's hard to say whether it's election related with, some of the cabinet, or maybe more based on some Fed comments or potentially some earnings impacts. Nonetheless, we've seen a little bit of a pullback. Good afternoon. Hope you are doing well. We have some housing data to cover, and then NVIDIA earnings have taken the spotlight here this week. So we have a couple things to kind of touch on, but it will be a little bit of a lighter week here this week for our market update. My name is Brandon Steele, financial advisor with Mainsail Financial Group here in Bellevue. And our goal every Thursday is to bring to you the market news, the data, the trends we're watching, and hopefully weed out a bit of the noise along the way. We're going to break apart NVIDIA earnings, mostly because of how impactful it is on the index and markets in general. Plus, obviously, because it is kind of an area that many people are watching, given the story, obviously, over the last couple of years. But before we do that, I do want to touch on some housing data over the past week or so. So we had a lot of housing data between last Thursday and today. One of the things I want to touch on is housing starts. So housing starts were up 1.31 million, down again for the month here for October. Building permits at 1.42 million. Home builder confidence, however, even with some of this negative news, did pick up a little bit. So that was interesting to see. And I think maybe more on the optimistic side of it as well, existing home sales did come out today at 3.96 million, which is the first time that we've seen this rise on an annual basis in quite some time. Now, that said, please take this with a grain of salt. This is still a low number historically, but over the last few years or so, it's the first time we've seen it rise on an annual basis for some time. I assume that some of this may be some optimism, some anticipation for lower rates to come. Maybe as the Fed is actually starting to decrease rates, home buyers are thinking that maybe they can get in now, and then when rates come down, maybe refi. I know that's been a story that many real estate agents have been saying for a while, but maybe now home buyers are starting to consider that a little more seriously, given the Fed's path. That said, do keep in mind the Fed's path doesn't necessarily dictate mortgage rates in and of itself. So just kind of keep that in mind that certainly if rates do continue to come down, we may see mortgage rates drop as well, but it doesn't go hand in hand necessarily. But I think that may likely be what's going on here is maybe people are feeling a little more optimistic about rates coming down, thinking that, maybe this is the chance to kind of buy and then refi down the road. But time will tell, right? There's one data point on the existing home sales, and a good one for the first time in a bit, but again, still lower than historical. So on top of that, before NVIDIA earnings, we also had initial jobless claims come out today. Jobless claims were at 213,000, so a little bit of a tick down again here this week. And then on the NVIDIA side of it, so NVIDIA announced earnings just yesterday after the close of the market. And in general, what I'll share is that it was mostly good. Earnings beat, revenue beat, and I think it was the data center revenue specifically nearly doubled, actually. So, in general, pretty incredible in terms of the earnings report. However, where we maybe saw a little slippage, it was down quite a bit in the after hours yesterday. It's not down quite as far here today, but they also issued guidance, and guidance was still amazing as well. So guidance, for those who aren't familiar, what this says is basically each company will report their earnings, and then many of them will also share what they expect, what they anticipate to come in the next quarter or year, or whatever it might be. And obviously, NVIDIA is a high-flying company with a lot of high hopes. So you can imagine guidance was expected to be strong, and it was. However, and even though it was above estimates, I think that there are just such high hopes for the growth of this company, which obviously has already been recognized, but I think that many investors think that this will just continue forever and ever, that they have these crazy high bar or high hopes for how that earnings growth continues. And I think that's why we've seen it, kind of pull back slightly here today. Not that it was bad, but just that the expectations maybe, especially for some of the higher estimates or hopes, were so high that that didn't quite, let's say, please everybody, if that makes sense. So very interesting. And again, NVIDIA obviously now being such a large company has a big pull on the S&P in general, up or down, depending on the direction. So that said, it's not down too big at the moment. So we're not seeing much of an impact today. But certainly if there are, increases or decreases down the road, it will impact the index as a whole. With that, be sure to tune in next week. I will address briefly kind of a quick market update since our last conversation. But before I do, be sure to tune in next Thursday. We'll be touching on consumer sentiment, consumer confidence, the Fed minutes, GDP, income, spending, inflation, and all of that is on Wednesday. We'll cover it ahead of the market closure on Thanksgiving for the holiday. So we have a lot of data to cover there next week. Before we break this week, though, I did want to just provide kind of a quick update. Obviously, we've been talking a bit about the election and the impacts to the markets. We saw a big spike there right out of the gate. Ever since, we've seen a little bit of a pullback. It's hard to say whether it's election related with some of the cabinet, or maybe more based on some Fed comments, or potentially some earnings impacts. Nonetheless, we've seen a little bit of a pullback since then, but not significant. Markets are still up, pre versus today, basically. But nonetheless, we have seen that excitement maybe fizzle out a little bit in terms of how the markets, anyways, have been viewing the election. So more to come on this for sure. Obviously, this is generally the case, is whether it's good or bad, we see an initial reaction, and then we kind of get back to the basics and understanding what things actually translate to. So through the end of the year will be really important, obviously, as well. We'll stop there, but be sure to tune in next week, where we will be covering, again, a lot, let's just say, and certainly kind of touching on some of this all before the Thanksgiving holiday. So in the meantime, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.